the church does hide narcissistic personalities really well as the head of the home. He seemed to be a godly man. He seemed to love me. I could not have left until I did because I didn't understand what was going on. You can't pinpoint it. I was constantly open, trying to figure out how to fix this, how to be to make him happy, how for him to be happy, how to make him look good as a pastor. But the material that was coming in that I was told that was godly was not. There was some godliness to it, but it had a twist to it. There is no other way to live emotionally but to give yourself up, because you need that spiritual connection to be able to pray and find your way out, which I didn't even know that's what I was looking for, and still had no idea that I was going to escape. That escape just happened spontaneously. But I felt free to make a godly appeal in a manner that was approachable. I would just go to my room and pray. And I have seen God move in ways that you think, how did that happen?
Welcome to the Keeping Your Power Real Talk on Resilience podcast. I'm your host, Tracidoula. I'm a family and birth advocate, a mentor, and your personal encourager. I wanted to create the space for individuals, families, and professionals who are done with just surviving and want to rise. Because when everything feels like it's falling apart, the one thing the world can't take from you is your power. And that's where resilience begins. It's not just riding the waves or surviving the storms. It's about how to overcome the challenges. So whether you're in the thick of it or reflecting on where you've been, pull up a chair and let's navigate the hard conversations and the beautiful stories that together we can be honest and use empathy and have a desire to grow, all while, of course, keeping your power in the process. Hey everybody, welcome back to Real Talk on Resilience with Detra Part 2. Thank you for sitting down with me today, Detra. I'm super excited about talking about this topic again.
Well, I appreciate you asking me. I've only done Part 2 on one other podcast, and anyway, so this is very exciting for me.
So part 1, we talked about escaping from emotionally abusive marriages, and Detra shared her story of physically getting out of the car and escaping and spending time at a homeless shelter. And I think that you just had an anniversary, didn't you?
Yeah, 9 years when I entered. Halloween was the 9-year anniversary of me entering the homeless shelter in Chinatown in New York.
Most amazing. And so y'all need to go back and listen to that episode. But me and Detra both felt like it was really important to talk about, what emotional abuse is, because it took us, we were both, I was married 31 years and you were married how long?
34.
And so I feel like we're not alone in that we stay and we are trying to do all the things that we know to do to make things work. And I feel like, too, that emotional abuse is not talked about a lot, especially in the church, because we were married to people. You were married to a pastor. I was married to somebody that had always grown up in church. His dad was a pastor and he did preach also, but he was not ordained. He was licensed, but didn't want to be ordained. We, as pastors' wives are, I think, held to a certain standard to either not say something when we don't align with our feelings, or we can't share our feelings, or we can't, step out of line. So, I think it's really important to define what emotional abuse we're talking about and uncover some things and then share how we both moved forward, and hopefully somebody can take that and, have some encouragement, because we don't need to wallow in, our experiences. I think that that's why we go through them, to share them. And, so thank you for being here. Thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. 'Cause it's not easy, not easy at all.
No, it's not.
But let's define this. Emotional abuse. So this is coming from the book, The Emotionally Destructive Marriage by Leslie Varnick. I poured myself into this book because, first of all, I didn't know where to start, because I was hearing some things from, from people and getting more information, because, I just I was cloudy headed and confused and just didn't know where to go. So actually my therapist gave me, some books and she didn't really even tell me anything about them. She said, here's a buffet, go and try to read some things. And it really hit me when I was starting to define what was happening, because she didn't say, hey, you're being emotionally abused.
Right.
She's like, here's what you're telling me. Here's some things you need to read. Come back and tell me what you think. So this book defines emotionally abused systematically degrades, diminishes, and can emotionally destroy the personhood of the abused. Most people describe emotional abuse as being far more painful and traumatical than physical abuse. When the abusive behavior is perpetrated by someone who promises to love and cherish you, it is even more devastating and destructive. Destructive behaviors and attitudes can sometimes be difficult to describe. That's why emotionally destructive marriages are not usually diagnosed by looking at one single episode of sinful behavior, but rather repetitive attitudes and behaviors that result in tearing someone down and inhibiting her growth or his growth, because this isn't just a husband thing. This could be a wife thing too. So when I think about emotional abuse, a lot of movies or a lot of people talk about being called names or being yelled at or, being demeaned or things like that. I was never called names. I was never yelled at. How about you?
I was not called names until I was going through my childhood abuse, and it was rather heinous, and the things that I was made to do and the things that were done to me, and he would call me names. He felt like he told me that he was very angry about my abuse because it meant that I wasn't perfect, which meant that his life wasn't perfect. And he was very angry. And I apologized like over 100 times for being abused to him when I finally figured out why am I apologizing to him for what men did to me? But he would call me ugly names. And I would say, you do know I was 2 years old, and those guys, he goes, it doesn't matter. You did it anyway. And he would call me ugly names. And I finally stood up to him one day. I said, don't ever call me those names again. But now that was after we had been married like 25 years or so. But that was it. And as far as being yelled at, he was a very mild-mannered man. So no, it wasn't anything you could really put your finger on.
I think that, people in the church, when we're trying to figure out the confusing part of our marriages, a lot of us go to pastors' wives and even our pastors and, or even, some churches have counselors. And I think we have to be very careful who we confide in, because most of the Christian counseling that I got was, well, if you are not happy, then you need to pray more for him or pray more with him. Mm-hmm. And it was always something that I was doing wrong. So I was in this mode of, you even said it, I was in this mode of just trying to fix it. Yeah. Like, what am I doing wrong that we are not getting along? And what I started uncovering was, emotional abuse can be very subtle and very soft. And he didn't call me by name a lot. He dehumanized me by calling me like nicknames that I didn't like. And I even told him that I didn't like them. So it's, the abusive part does not always have to be overt. It can be absolutely, undercover, because it's that conditioning and it's that long term, not just one situation that most of us are experiencing, because it's not all bad. It's.
And I would say most of mine was done in a manner like you just know something's wrong, but you can't figure out what's wrong.
Right. That was me. It was something's just not right.
Yeah. And
it wasn't really tension. It was just not connection. And it was just the feeling of something's just not right here. And other things that, that I had read in this book that she goes through and she talks about, are these things happening to you? Again, this is not just husbands. This can be wives too. Does your spouse belittle or mock you? And that would happen in groups of people. And I would just have to laugh it off.
Yeah, that's true. He would belittle me when he would have men around him.
Yep. My spouse uses the Bible to criticize me or to get me to do things that he wants me to do.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, the quoting scripture was he would, belittle me as a mom if my kids did not obey me. And he would say, well, your children are supposed to obey you, and it was my fault. And of course, he wouldn't say anything to them. It would just be my fault. My spouse speaks poorly about me to my children.
I don't really think that happened as much. Now, after I left and I was with my oldest son for a while, and he would ask questions, and he was like, we all know something's wrong with Dad. You just covered for him. And I did. I thought that was my job. And he said, I now see things differently. Like I would have to go to bed 3 or 4 days in a row. They had to bring me food. I couldn't even operate because we were on the road most of the time and I was exhausted. So I didn't know this, but my oldest son said he would go out in the living room and tell the kids, he goes, look, you got to be nice to Mom. She's having a hard time and we're going to take care of her, as if he was in charge, because we didn't know Dad was doing what was putting you to bed. We had no idea behind the scenes that you were just trying to get over how he was treating you. Mm-hmm. So there was that. But as far as him openly belittling me in front of the kids, I don't think so.
Yeah. My oldest daughter tells me after everything was over or the divorce was final and I was starting to, visit them without him or doing the life things without him. She said it became very clear that I was the one that was holding everybody together and that it was very evident that my health was going very downhill and that, physically again, too, I wasn't able to get out of bed, for a while. I was, on antidepressants and, not being able to cook, not being able to homeschool, not being able to do these things. Again, things can be very covert and it may look like just an illness or, hey, Mom's tired, or, he would say, well, you're just doing too much.
Yeah.
You're just doing too much. Yeah. And my oldest daughter was like very evident reflecting back what was happening because he was causing the stress. And he would actually laugh and say, I'm your reason that you're on high blood pressure medicine. And he would laugh at that. I don't feel free to challenge my husband or disagree with him.
I took courses, under IBLP on how to make a proper appeal, a godly appeal to your husband. So I followed all the steps on how to make a godly appeal so that I was not, out from under the umbrella. I was not being rebellious. And I am very good, at this. And what I learned is it would be like Nathan, the prophet, going to King David. When he tells David the story of the man who had one little lamb and the next door neighbor had thousands of lambs, and a visitor came to visit the man who owned everything. And rather than taking one from his thousands, he stole the little man's lamb next door and killed it and served it. And David goes, that man will die. He will die. And he goes, you're the man. And so that's how I learned him. If I tried to approach him, I called it a ball field. If I tried to go play ball on the ball field where we were playing, he couldn't see anything. But if I could go build another ball field with 2 different teams and show, because he's a sports critic. Oh, he would be, are you kidding me? And I go, oh, well, guess what? This was our ball game. And I remember one time presenting a case that was, I became very good at this. And he looked at me and with admiration, he's Detra, that was really good. And I said, well, this is a situation we're dealing with. And admiration, he sat back. But again, he will never take any accountability or responsibility for himself. That's what I would do. So I felt free to make a godly appeal in a manner that, was approachable. Once in a blue moon, I would put my hands on my hips and let him have it. Just, I don't know, once every couple of years, like, who do you think you are to treat me like this? But no, not very often. I tried to, and I would just go to my room and pray. And I have seen God move in ways that you think, how did that happen? to change his mind and to let me have some relief in incredible ways. And that was how I got through it when I was think I got to get away from him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let's talk about the umbrella of protection again, because that was an educational point in both of our church backgrounds that not everybody has. And I've realized that today, that, the Gothard teaching of God and then husband and then wife and then children was, the umbrella of protection. And I don't know, I wish I had a dime for every time I heard that. If you're out from the, umbrella, then God is not going to hear you, or you are not going to be protected. You're going to be outside and he's going to strike you if you don't do what, your husband says. And, which now through clarity of the Holy Spirit, which I'm so thankful for, what that does is it separates us from our own relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's absolutely what was happening in my situation. But I couldn't disagree with him. I had to, whenever we would be in a conversation and I would come up with my thoughts, or I would, reciprocate the conversation. He would just, he would look down. He would never look at me, and he would shake his head and he'd go, mm-mm. Whatever I said, even if it was my opinion and there was no right or wrong, he'd be, mm-mm. Just very subtle, very covert. Yeah. And it kept going and kept going. So it just dwindled me down to never really responding in a conversation that I knew it wasn't going to matter anyway.
Right.
So with that, didn't really know what I was supposed to think. And really, in the end, I didn't have a voice. Okay, well, he didn't want to hear it. But being that good wife, or that wife up underneath the husband that didn't cause waves or those kind of things, I lost myself in that.
You don't have a choice if you're going to be a godly wife. And that's what you have for a husband. And not all husbands are this way. But the church does hide narcissistic personalities really well as the head of the home. And there is no other way to live emotionally, or I'm going to tell you even spiritually, but to give yourself up, because you need that spiritual connection to be able to pray and find your way out, which I didn't even know that's what I was looking for. Right. I had no idea till like the last few months, and still had no idea that I was going to escape. That escape just happened spontaneously. It wasn't nothing planned out about it. But you need the spiritual connection, to be able to pray and see what happens. And because, to me, you take your request to God, and most people think prayer is telling God what you want done on earth. And I think it's just the opposite. I come before the throne and I'm like, here's the situation. My hands are outstretched. I don't have my fingers curled around this. You're omniscient. You're omnipotent. I'm neither. And I want to know, what do you want done in this situation? What needs to happen? What do I need to think? Because as humans, we have our own thoughts, and we can be very intellectual. We can have several degrees. We can be great readers. We can be philosophical. But scripture still says, be not wise in your own eyes. And all your ways acknowledge him. And so I've learned I don't really want to know my way or thoughts. I want to know where he is, what he wants done. And so as I would just take these things, then you don't know where he's going to answer. It could be through a person. It could be something on a billboard. It could be through a verse of scripture, but he's going to answer it down here. Mm-hmm. He's going to answer it down here, but I'm not looking here for anything. I'm looking there. And so I think as I would ask these questions, and little by little, because let's be honest, if God had said the first time 3 weeks being married, Detra, you gotta escape now, or this isn't the voice of God. This isn't the voice of God. This isn't how, because I was raised what marriage was, right. So I think even if I had known this isn't going to work out, I still couldn't have done it. I could not have left until I did, because I didn't understand what was going on. You can't pinpoint it. You can't, he seemed to be a godly man. He seemed to love me. All of these things. He was well known for.
You think what's happening is normal.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
because that's all you know. That's all
That
you've
is
known.
on it. That is on.
You want to, you love the Lord, and
Yeah.
that's your commitment to him. And if you have only been taught, this very narrow road of what a wife is supposed to be, then of course, then it's there's only going to come a time where somebody comes in your life, or God intervenes, and says, okay, that's enough. Because
Yeah.
it can be so, and that's what emotional abuse is. And that's
Mm.
why the church, it's like, that's why it shifted from, oh, well, I can't beat her. I just have to twist her mind, to get, what needs to happen, or to get my satisfaction out of, whatever the gain is.
Yeah. Well, if a
So, I
woman
mean,
came to me as a pastor's wife for counseling about marriage, I can tell you I would have said he's the head of the home.
mhm,
You know, I would have
mhm,
talked about the umbrella.
mhm,
I can
mhm.
also tell you within my time, there were two women that I said, you got to get away from him. You got to get away from him. You have to draw some lines. So there were, you could, it depended on the situation of what he was doing. And one man, he was a pastor who was so abusive, emotionally abusive to her. And I said, you've got to get away. But she had a lot of children and she didn't do it. And another woman, I said, listen, you got to draw some lines with him, what he's doing and telling you. So I would acknowledge that certain things were bad. I would say you do need to get away, but I would also say this is something you entered into. You need to understand not every man's the same.
Right.
And you need to figure out who he is and love him for who he is. And I still believe
Mhm.
that is true. And he needs to learn to love you for who you are. It is a very devastating destruction, this type of abuse.
When we acknowledge it, or when the clouds kind of part, so to speak, when I realized that him ignoring me for not days but weeks was not normal.
Yeah.
I was not, like I said, my therapist, and when I started going, was, out of the encouragement of my daughter, that saw that, she's like, something's not right. And, you need to go and get some things worked out, whether that's, because I wasn't going to therapy talking about my marriage.
Yeah.
I was going to go to therapy talking about, I have a child that struggles with mental illness, and I thought I was going to end up talking about her. And when my therapist said, and I went to a therapist, and she was absolutely God-given, because I needed both the clinical therapy, and I also needed somebody that was strong in theology, because I wasn't going for somebody to tell me, you need to get out of your marriage. I wasn't
Yeah.
even going to talk about him. So when I started talking about him, and, us working through why I was thinking the way I was thinking, where was that coming from for me? And her pointing out some things so that I could come to my own conclusions, which is a good therapist, by the way, the clouds opened. And then once the clouds opened, I was able to dive into the theology of, getting closer to God, and then realizing that this starts with us. Change starts with us. It doesn't start with, how do we get better? How do we be better, wives for our husbands to continue to do the same behavior, right? That's not what it is. It's change begins with who we are in Christ, and remembering who we are in Christ, because we have forgotten over 30 years, because we are not listening to what, God had created us to do, and the true biblical parts of true love and biblical relationship, that's lost in that the relationship that has been broken down for whatever. So I had to, stop thinking about him. There's a grieving process. Okay, if this is not normal and this isn't right, then what was that? What just happened? And I couldn't dwell on that. So I dove into prayer And, when they say prayer, continuous prayer and pray without ceasing, I was just in a state of prayer for a long time. And the more that I prayed and the more that I walked during that time a lot to process thoughts, the more clarity came, which came more heartbreak. Because, as I was, reading some of these, because it wasn't easy, it was like, okay, I was getting more clarity. Therefore, I had to come to terms with what my marriage actually was, which is what I didn't want. Like, I didn't want to think that, oh no, him looking me in the face and saying, you're never going to be able to live without me, was not okay. And then realizing it wasn't okay comes with heartbreak and grief and paralyzation, really.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you believe those things that are soft and but coercive. And it leaves you, because you have two choices. You can either be bitter and angry of the person who's doing this to you, or you can focus on yourself that brings change in your relationship with God. And
True.
it sounds easy, but it's absolutely not.
It is not easy, and it is excruciating. It would be easier to blame. It would be easier to say, I don't, this is what happened to me. This is forever broken, especially when you're taught that marriage is till death do you part. So I have broken a vow. I am ruined for life. It's very easy to fall into, particularly within religious arenas. So not only do you have this type of abuse, which is hard to point out, and then if you are within a marriage, where you've said till death do you part, and then if you put that also within religion, you've just kind of got a threefold cord that's hard to be broken. One might be easy to break too, but that's a third step. That's three cords woven together. It's very difficult to do. And so, I don't, when my story came out, I had many, many people reaching out, and I started hearing this term deconstruction. And people wanted me to join different groups, deconstruction. This is the first time I'm going to say it publicly. I don't like the term deconstruction. I don't want to be a part of anything where I'm deconstructing something. What I want to say is blow the shit up. Just put a bomb in it and blow it up. What's left, if you've got a foundation, it's still going to be there. If you've got something solid, it's going to be there. Don't deconstruct, just blow it up and then figure out what you've got left. If there's nothing to build on, build a foundation now that's not going to wash away. Don't build it on the sand, go build it on a rock. When I blew it up, literally, I blew it up, the rock that I'd been building my life on hadn't moved at all. It was just the building materials that I had been given were inferior. They didn't hold up. I would be told this is one kind of board, and actually it wasn't. It was a lie. And that's what I found was the problem, was the building materials that I had been given to build upon that rock. Now, I consider it quite a blessing that I had been told about the true rock, and that foundation was still there for me.
Right.
But I say quit the deconstruction, just blow it up, see what's there. And if there's nothing left, find a good solid rock. Find your good rock and you start building. And don't believe anything anybody tells you about the quality of the building materials. You'll know when you have it in your hands. You'll know when you process it. Don't let anybody tell you. Now, sure, collect your information, do your research, but also read the reviews, Right. I like reading reviews on things before I buy it, because something can look so good and you go read the reviews and like, oh, wow, they're really good at marketing, or they're good at using Chat GPT to use their wording for this, because this is all wrong. So don't take anybody's word for it, but you then collect your building materials. And here's the deal. Our houses aren't all going to look the same. We don't all need the same building materials. Right. I have different ones than other people, and their homes are gorgeous, but that's not the home for me. But blow it up. Figure out if you have a foundation or not. Get a strong foundation and start using quality materials.
And you talked about, we stayed in these marriages because we were taught what marriage was, or you don't you don't divorce, like under any circumstances, you don't. But then some people, you know, the argument is, well, if, you know, if there's physical abuse, it's okay, you know, or if there's, you know, unfaithfulness. And I think that, you know, there's some laws that even say that, you know, like you can't, in some states, you know, have divorce, like there's like the no contest, or some states have the doesn't matter, you can divorce for whatever reason. Some states still have the you can't unless somebody's been unfaithful. Well, this book again says unfaithfulness in a marriage doesn't only occur in the sexual realm. It happens when there's a regular pattern of not caring, not providing, not protecting, and not honoring. Unfaithfulness is leaving the marriage relationship even when you haven't physically left the home or even the marital bed. That's what I talked about to my therapist for weeks and months, was where was this breakdown? And, you know, and what was my responsibility in it too? And that's, you know, that's what we're talking about here, is focusing on self, focusing on, you know, blowing it up, not even deconstructing it up. I love that, because you're right. People are talking about deconstructing and what do I really believe, and those things. Absolutely blow it up and start over. And, you know, figure it out. And that's really what I had to do. I had to scrape away everything and start over with who God thought about me. And, you know, yes, I'm a believer. Yes, I believed that Jesus died on the cross for me. And I, you know, repented of my sins. And, you know, he is building me a home in heaven. And, you know, so I started there. I started very simple. And because I didn't want to get bitter and angry about the last 31 years. I just didn't. I knew that wasn't going to be healthy. And it wasn't going to be healthy for me to be angry about, oh, well, I wish I had known all that I know now. I wish I had known that so I could confront. Maybe we would still be together if I could have communicated a certain way, or, you know, if I could just make him see, you know, those things. Yeah. But it is about finding that foundational, what's going to stick, and the resilience through that. And, you know, for me, you know, I have, you know, keeping your power, but my power comes from God. And I love the pastor that I have now, you know, his favorite verse is the ones where, you know, he says, you know, dear Lord, give me the power and the desire to do what pleases you. And that's what I have held on to for a while. Give me the power to do the things that I need to see, the things that I need to do, the things that I need to recognize. And I'm not going to let this last 31 years follow me and hold me down. But in the process of that, that's the after, right? Because we're both free and we can talk about this now. But the people that are in the middle of this, and that's why I read some of these off, I don't think people realize what they're in. I didn't realize what I was in for a while.
Me either.
We want it to all go away. We want it to be the high mountains that we know exist because we've been there. It's not all bad times. You know, it's good times. We've had some fabulous times, you know, over those years. When I talk about it now, I'll say, okay, when I was married and had the kids were all at home, this is what happened. And I have wonderful memories. But that's the emotional abuse part of it, is like, you know, potentially there could be these really good times. Why isn't it always like that? Why isn't it always like that? And what helped me too, you know, seeking wise counsel, of course, and that's what we talked about. Being very careful in that and who we entrust when we're talking through these things, because, you know, just biblical counselors don't have the clinical parts of what really needs to go along with this. And even hearing some wives get some really bad advice, you know, like, oh, well, if he hasn't hit you, you're the one that's wrong. Or, you know, oh, just, you know, pray with him, pray for him, or don't really know how to counsel. So we're going to give them benefit of the doubt. So any pastors on here that are listening to this or pastors' wives, take some courses on, be trauma informed on, emotional abuse or, other things, or have good resources to give to people. But what I started out with myself was remembering that, so Leslie in this book has an acronym, it's CORE, and it's, commit to truth. So we have to commit to what we believe is true. And for me, that's the Bible. For me, that's God. For me, that's, hey, give me wisdom, discernment when I'm seeking you, which is so powerful, by the way.
Right.
Like the most powerful. And that really kind of shatters that umbrella, doesn't it? It's like, if God shows me wisdom and discernment and it's different from the man that's over me, oh no, what's the umbrella then? And that's what they don't want us to know. I believe that's what they didn't want us to know. They didn't want us to know the truth.
Well, God, that umbrella became their way of blocking everything from the one true living God, and they became God. That it made them think that umbrella was God. It wasn't. It was just their own wisdom. And most of these men that are doing this, they are not necessarily praying men. I remember one of my daughters telling me, she probably deny this now, but she was like, why does God always answers your prayer? He doesn't ever answer dad's. And, we laughed. What are you going to do? I had never put into that category, but these men are generally not truth seekers. They use God's name. They'll use scripture, but their hearts are not turned towards God. It's only turned towards what they can get for themselves or what they can make people think about themselves. So that umbrella became something they would use to block us talking to God, being with God, and knowing God. That was their weapon.
It was so weird because I would want to do family devotions and he didn't. I would want to pray with him and he wouldn't. And he would just shut down after we'd come out of the door. We'd come in and then it was just nothing. Like there would be no connection, no talking, no family, anything. I think on the outside, everybody saw that, of course, if we were at church or we were at a function or something, oh, they're just the happiest family can be. And then we would walk in the door and like there would be nothing. There would be, just like emotional abandonment. Again, reflecting back on us, CORE. So the letters is CORE. So commit to truth is first. And then being open to instruction, being teachable. Like we have to be teachable in the things that we might not want to hear. And that's hard. That's hard sometimes. When we're going through this is to just to have an open heart and a prayer for wisdom. Because God says, if you want wisdom, ask for it. And it's so funny because we're like, I wish I knew. And then we don't ever pray for wisdom.
That was not, my experience. Being teachable, I felt like that's what I was doing, was constantly learning. I was constantly open, trying to figure out how to fix this, how to make him happy, how for him to be happy, how to make him look good as a pastor. So I was constantly open, but the material that was coming in that I was told that was godly was not. It had a twist to it. There was some godliness to it, but it had a twist to it. Being open to learning is very, very important. I think that's key to it, but also having discernment and knowing what's true and what's not.
I remember asking for wisdom and discernment and just clarity all the time. And especially when my therapist said, okay, now you know what's happening. What are you going to do with it? Because like I said, I didn't go to therapy for somebody to say, hey, leave your husband. Like it was an absolute, journey and a very hard grieving. Like I probably fought it for over a year and a half before I could even say that, oh, wow, maybe I don't need to be married to this person. So open to instruction, praying for wisdom, discernment, and then being responsible. So being responsible for ourselves and respecting others without being used.
Right.
Taking responsibility, respecting others without being used. Because we can, disagree with someone, but still respect where they're coming from, or take accountability for what we have done and building a boundary. Because with that umbrella that we were under, most of it was, if you don't respect me, then I'm not hearing you.
Right.
So it's like, okay, I'm going to take accountability, for my side. You take accountability for your side, but you can't just hold me accountable and not hold yourself accountable.
And taking responsibility, if you put it in this type of abuse, your responsibility is to be the kind of wife he needs. Mm-hmm. So that's not going to give you freedom if that's the way if that's the box you're putting that in. And that was the box I always put it in. I was taking responsibility as the wife to be submissive to him. It was only when I figured out that it was when he asked me to lie to the group of churches. Mm-hmm. And that's when I was like, you do know Ananias and Sapphira, God killed her separately because she lied. He didn't kill her because Ananias lied. He killed her because she chose to lie along with him. And I will not do that for you. And that is when, I saw the truth. He was willing to do whatever it took to get this job over all these pastors, and even asking me to lie. And that's where I drew the line. I can't even believe you're asking me this. One, I can't believe that you think it's okay to lie to become the head of pastors. And so that's when my responsibility was to be truthful. And I just told him, you go be interviewed, you want to lie to them, go do that. Mm-hmm. And I won't say anything. Mm-hmm. But hopefully on the committee, and most committees, my opinion is most churches, the Holy Spirit of God is not even involved. These are just power plays, people with money, people with opinions, people with political, whatever. But I said, hopefully on that committee, there's going to be a couple of men who are praying men, and they're going to go, something's wrong. And if they call me in and ask me, I'm going to tell the truth. Otherwise, you go do what you want to do. That's what you want to be. And they're going to fall for it because this is the type of men they are. Y'all deserve each other. And I'll keep my mouth shut. But then it became a deal where I was not being responsible. I was enabling.
Right.
And that's when I when I could discern. I had to take responsibility for my enabling.
Right.
And that's the game changer.
Mm-hmm. So that's E, is having empathy without enabling.
Yeah.
Having empathy without enabling, but you reverted back to committing to truth. You knew what truth was.
I did.
And then you stood up for it. And so that's why I really like core, like that first commit to truth and know what truth is. We can't default to, well, my mom said that, divorce was wrong. Okay, well, that in a vacuum might be true, but then there's a nuanced conversation of what God really intended for divorce and what does that even mean? And then, or what does this mean in my marriage? Whatever is in our heads that is keeping us back from growing. And, I just didn't want to be bitter and angry. I needed to have empathy for him in certain areas. I understand how he was raised. I understand that, I don't know some things, and I understand that he might not be equipped or capable to do certain things, but that doesn't mean that he can't learn.
Right.
That doesn't mean that he's not responsible for being the best spouse that he should be. Just like I'm holding myself accountable for this part of the marriage, which going through core, the committing to truth, so being open to instruction, the responsibility and then the respect of the other person, without being bitter and angry, and then having empathy without enabling. Those things can, I believe, holds like a simple steps to working through some things for self and for the marriage or for the relationship to come to respectful communication and confrontation. So confrontation doesn't have to be bad. I think we kind of shy away from confrontation, and it's, or the conversation that has to be had to move forward. And that's what I was scared of. I was scared to have a conversation that was going to blow it all up. I was scared of the explosion. I really was. Because I didn't want to fight anymore. I didn't want to be told again that I was the wrong one, or I was the unhappy one, or I wasn't praying enough, or whatever the excuse was. But my therapist, she said, either you have to come to a place to want to move together forward. That's a conversation, or you're going to keep growing away from him anyway. And that's not the marriage God wants you to have either. That was not really what I wanted her to tell me. It was, and she was right. I had to come to the place where I was no longer going to live the way that I was living. So I did, I just went to him and said, hey, I'm not happy. And I would really love to figure out how we can put this back together. What do you think? And he said, well, how do we not get back here, Tracy? And I said, I don't know. I'm working on some things. Do you want to go work on some stuff? He's like, well, tell me what I need to do for us not to get back here. And I said, that's not my responsibility. That's your responsibility. And so that told me that, he didn't want to work together because he wanted the checklist of things to work together. And from that day forward, he never spoke to me again and has not spoken to me.
Wow.
Since then, because I wanted us to move forward in accountability and responsibility together. And he was not willing to do that. So we can get a lot of answers through, I think, CORE also, because when you were doing your thing strong in Christ, I'm sure he was butting up against that.
I don't know that he was butting up against it because I was the pastor's wife. I was his wife. I didn't have a career. So I was working in the church, teaching classes, playing the piano. So everything I did was to help him succeed. So he was not butting up against anything because I wasn't giving him anything to butt up against. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just occasionally his treatment of me or dismissiveness of me or, the gaslighting was what I just thought that was part of it because my dad treated my mom so badly and him, getting a good buddy around and making fun of me, belittling me, those kinds of things. But there really wasn't anything for him to butt up against with me.
So it's very covert. So the making fun of was there was one time and I would play along or I would, laugh it off. But, there was one time I remember coming home from church and we had a pretty big drive. And I looked at him and I said, it's not funny anymore. I'm not laughing anymore. I think it's the subtlety of breaking us down little by little is the reason why we don't get to thinking about ourselves being important enough to not be treated that way.
I thought being a wife submissive was the important role in life.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't occur to me that was not of importance. I don't know how I could have come about thinking I'm important enough to be able to be a standalone me. The importance of the role was supporting him and everything he wanted in a way that made him happy. So, that I would never have come around that to either. No, what I have struggled with is I'm divorced, so I'm abysmal failure at everything. And as we know, I have many children who choose not to associate with me. So it's like, I've struggled with that, with that picture and with those relationships. And I came across something and I have to ask, God, I need a visual and I am totally visual. And one day I saw this video and it was a teacher and he had a crisp, $100 bill. He asked students who wants it. Everybody wants the $100 bill, and he folded it in half, who wants it? Everybody wants it. He wadded it up, threw it in the floor, picked it up. Who wants it? Everybody still wants it. The $100 bill is no longer crisp and pretty and clean. It's all wadded up, but it is still worth $100. And that visual did more. I thought, okay, my life is broken, shattered, blown up, crumpled, all of that, but I'm still worth $100,
Yes, ma'am.
And you can put an iron to a crumpled $100 bill. You can do that. But, sometimes, at Home Depot or at the cigar lounge, people give me bills. I'm like, how has this thing survived? There can be a little chunk out of it or different things. The bill is still an exchangeable, even rate as the crisp new one. The value has not been changed. It may not look as pretty and clean as the other one, but the value is still the same. And what I've had to determine, you've talked about how God sees us. And when I go up in the cigar lounges, I have my songs that I play on YouTube, on the big TV, while I'm tidying up or doing whatever. And one is Lauren Daigle's You Say. And I love that song. And I sing it at the top of my lungs. And I usually play it 2 or 3 times and sing it because God does say things about us. And it's up to us whether or not we're going to believe it. And if I remember at the choruses, you say, I'm love when I can't feel a thing. You say, I am strong when I think I am weak. You say, I am held when I'm falling short. And when I don't belong, you say, I am yours. And for me, it is feeling like I don't belong. I was telling somebody the other day, we were talking about, even in my world now where I am surrounded by so many people who cheer me on and who love me. And I have, my cigar community and I work in it. I have, my heart, I have so many people, but there is a profound loneliness in my life. And that now I love my alone time coming to my house, but still there is this, I can't describe it. It is so deep. And yet, when I feel like I don't belong, I know I'm his. And some days, that's what gets me through, is I am his. Hopefully one day there's going to be someone else in my life just to share life with, But we will see. It is, to me, the key is not being afraid of the loneliness. Mm-hmm. To me, the key is not being afraid of the blow up. To me, it is not being afraid of finding a new path. To me, it is not being afraid of not having a flashlight in the middle of darkness. To me, it's not being afraid of these road signs that you've never seen before. It is the ability to say, this is where I am and I'm scared. Can you show me one step? And being happy with one step, Mm-hmm. If you're just going to sit down and everything blow up and you can't go on, it's not going to end well.
Right.
And sometimes, I enabled. That was my big problem. I enabled, and I own that.
I did too.
But it still cost me everything I knew.
Yeah.
So going forward, I try not to enable. I still find I fall into this pattern,
Yeah.
And so I want to learn how not to enable and stand up for myself in a graceful way with dignity. But it is a lifelong process. But being able to recognize the subtle abuse, the things that are said offhandedly as teasing. Now, I don't see anything wrong with teasing somebody with love. There is a difference. The ways that you are told kind of a compliment, but it's not a compliment. Mm-hmm. The ways that you are told this is what's going to be available to you, and then it's not available to you. All of these things are lies and ways of abuse, and it destroys us psychologically. And so it is having the courage to say, I'm going to figure it out little by little by little. And then I always have to step back and go, so how did I do this in my life? How did I do this to other people? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As a pastor's wife, how did I encourage women to put up with this kind of abuse? Mm-hmm. I can remember one pastor's wife, we were visiting churches, and her husband, like when I was married to, he would give me a weekly allowance for groceries. Her husband did the same. Now, she had more children than I had, and her household allowance was less than mine. But she was telling me how he went to the grocery store and they had this big sale on cereal, and he had spent all but $10 of her weekly grocery bill on this cereal because it was such a good deal. And she was telling me this story. Now, one, I can look back and go, she's telling it because she's frustrated because she's left with $10 to feed her family. They're going to be eating rice and beans. So she's telling me that, and then she goes, but have to be a submissive wife. And I looked at her and I said, that's not submission. That is not submission. That's enabling a bully. Mm-hmm. And even though he would give me a weekly household allowance, in the beginning, he would come in and I said, why'd you buy this? Well, it's just an unauthorized purchase. I said, that's not your money to spend. I sent you with the list, I had babies at home. He would go and he was, it's okay. But he was spending my money. And I thought, well, I guess it's okay. It was a good deal. And one time I got a phone call for an oil change package. You would save all this money. And I knew what he paid for an oil change. And I said, well, I don't know. He's not here. And they said, well, you have 3 business days to change your mind. So I bought it. And he came in and I told him about it. And I said, hey, I made an unauthorized purchase, but look at this deal. Because he did it with me all the time. So I just assumed it was acceptable if it was a good deal. He got so mad at me. And I said, well, I can call. I have 3 business days to change it. But then it clicked with me. It's only okay to make unauthorized purchases if he's the one making the unauthorized purchases. He was just stealing my money. And I said, so maybe you will know you don't make unauthorized purchases with my money either. Okay. You tell me it's okay and that you're doing me a favor. Actually, you're not, because I really thought I was doing you a favor. Mm-hmm. So you don't do unauthorized purchases with my household allowance, and I will never make one with yours again. So sometimes it was figuring out how to let him have a little piece of what he was doing. And one time I played a little April Fool's trick on him. He would play tricks on me all the time, and I would sob and beg him to stop, and he wouldn't. And so I thought again, hey, it's okay. Maybe I just have never done this. I don't understand the fun that it is. Right. And I played an April Fool's joke on him. And he didn't speak to me for 3 days. Again, I was just thinking I was missing out because it's how he did it. I thought the behavior was I was not trying to take revenge in any way. But then when he didn't speak to me for 3 days, I was like, how interesting. I have sobbed and begged this man to quit playing pranks on me. And so I can tell you this, he never played another prank on me again. And I'm not saying tit for tat.
Right.
Well, learning how to recognize, doing some study research. When I began to research, they don't call it sociopath anymore, but narcissistic. And there's different levels of narcissistic. And the covert narcissistic behavior is the one that's the most difficult to figure out. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times in the Christian world, that may be the one you're dealing with.
Yep.
And so coming to terms with it, like you said, acknowledging. And to me, it's not wallowing in your pain, but it is acknowledging this is what I'm going through, validating it, getting someone to help give you the freedom to validate it, not tell you how to think about it, figuring out how to safely take care of yourself, I think is very important. And then blow it up.
Yep.
Blow it up and go on.
Yep. And you talked about loneliness and yes, being alone in a crowded room is a heartbreaking feeling, but I would rather do that than live another day like I was living for 31 years. Oh, and absolutely. When you get clarity and, freedom is good. Freedom is so good, and after there is a grieving process because your life has totally changed. Like there are sacrifices. There are sacrifices to the choices that you make, but it's not okay to live in confusion and in twisted, what I call twisted goodness, because that's how they portray it.
I have never doubted my decision. I have never missed him one second. I would never go back to that. Profound loneliness is heaven compared to that.
Absolutely. 100%.
There is still a profound loneliness. And I think some women in particular are afraid, even men, they're afraid of it.
They're afraid of it. Mm-hmm.
They're afraid of it. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, you got to be willing to go there and be okay. Mm-hmm. But it is part of the journey.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean you should go back.
Yes.
We never go back.
Yes, me either. I've never questioned it one day in my life. Not at all. Not at all. But that's, committing to truth. That's on the front side. That's the committing to truth part. Well, Detra, I am always so thrilled to sit down with you. And it's, one day we're going to sit down and we're not going to talk about this stuff. And we're just going to have coffee and we're going to laugh because it's always so heavy.
It is heavy.
But my goal is to help other people, encourage other people, and in our stories that are really heavy and a lot of heartbreak, that there is goodness and hope and God's love on the other side. And I hope somebody got some goodness out of this today. So thanks again for sitting down with me.
Well, thanks for having me. And this morning, as I knew how hard this was going to be, it was going to leave me in a hard place. But I'm very willing to do it for, I get many messages from all over the world of women. So I'm glad to do it. But I thought I'm not staying home. As soon as I close this computer, I have my purse ready. I'm going to Georgia's, my favorite place. I'll go smoke a cigar. I work at Home Depot. So I think the key is when you get in a hard place and you know it's there, you need to cry and let it out a little bit, but then get up and go do something. Don't allow the darkness because it is a darkness. This is not a healing portion. This is a darkness. And you got to go get light in there so that the darkness can be dispelled and know that, yes, it's been hard. Yes, it's cost me, but I'm going to be okay. And it's worthwhile doing.
Yes. Yes. Love that. Well, we will talk to you soon. And I appreciate you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Keeping Your Power podcast. I hope this episode reminded you that your feelings are valid and your voice matters. If it spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to know that they are seen. You can connect with me at tracidoula.com or find me on social media at Tracidoula. On the next episode, I sit down with Ashley, a first-time mom who experienced a tragic birth that led to the loss of her baby and now is educating so other moms don't have to experience the same. I hope to see you then. And until next time, keep your power in the process.